What can I say about Jimmy Page? I think that he's my favorite guitar player. He doesn't necessarily do neoclassical, although if you take the Rain song, that actually is really advanced for the time that it was written in as a rock guitar player and a blues bass guy. I had mentioned in another video that I was looking for somebody to do a sort of a romantic classical style in a in a modern setting, and Rain songs actually could be the closest anyone has come to that. If you go and listen to that, it's been said that Page would tune in ways for different songs that would make it the easiest to play. But right there, there's a stroke of genius. Now, Stairway to Heaven on Song Remains the Same, that's almost the thing that made me want to start playing. It used to be so mystical and unfathomable, just beautiful. Now I understand what he's doing now. Even so, that's really good. And there's different versions of that solo, like the one on the actual record. I don't know if there's different versions of that record, but I've definitely heard more than one version of that. Like hearing the vinyl version, or a vinyl version as it may have been, and then going and watching a video, it's not the same solo. It's similar, very similar. But there's some changes in the riffs. Now, Page edited that album, from what I understand. Like Stairway to Heaven is an amalgam from 3 different nights. Page didn't have Pro Tools or whatever. It's so easy to cut and paste parts now, right? But Page was doing that with a razor blade and glue on tape machines. It's amazing. He wasn't just a great guitar player, he was a great producer. And he has said that you couldn't make, like the first 4 Zeppelin albums or whatever. Really, I would say all the Zeppelin albums. You couldn't make those albums today. Well, the political, sort of the socio-political climate, it wouldn't allow you to make those records, I guess is what he's saying. It used to be more free or something. I tend to agree with him without getting into all that sociology and politics and all that. For instance, as an aside, somebody was talking on a Dio DVD, like a roadie guy or something. He was saying it was way easier, like in 1970, 1972. Maybe it was a Deep Purple DVD. It was way easier just to put together a band and get a contract and then be going around the country in a bus. And now, look at some of the bands today that you think are kind of successful, like, here's one kind of out of left field, but Black Veil Brides. That guy talks about traveling around in a beat-up station wagon. So, touring bands in general are not getting support. You have your first tier, and that's basically in the USA. That's going to be your Katy Perry, your Lady Gaga, your Beyonce, your Rihanna, maybe your Taylor Swift, your Selena Gomez. That's kind of your big acts today. And then below that, everybody's touring around in a beat-up old van or station wagon. But back in the day, you could get a contract and the record company would send you around in a bus. They were a lot more open to, like Frank Zappa was saying in another interview, the executives were just old men, and they were like, we don't know what any of this stuff is. Let's just throw a bunch of money at all these different bands and see what sticks, see what people like, see what brings in audiences. So it was a lot more exciting time, I think, at least for a musician to work with record companies. Now, maybe I'm totally naive and somebody needs to hit me with a naive stick. But it dovetails in with what Page was saying. He's saying, I don't know if we could have made these records in today's climate. And so getting back to Stairway to Heaven, song remains the same. That it was that. It was. I didn't come to appreciate the blues riffs of. It's. Was it Whole Lot of Love? I didn't come to appreciate the second half, how they would riff around on old standards, rock and roll and blues standards. I didn't appreciate that until years later. There's some really tasty blues riffing on the Song Remains the Same version of that. Dazed and Confused used to blow my mind. Listening to that, it's 26 minutes or whatever. Still blows my mind. I think I listened to that on the anniversary of the album release a couple of years back, and I was still taken aback by the quality of that performance. And even though Page says that, that wasn't our greatest, and there's a rumor that one of the co-producers of the band was begging them not to release that. Well, it's a good thing they actually did, because I think it's definitely worth listening to. But Page, okay, doesn't have your Paul Gilbert chops, right? Well, who does? But he definitely has a style. Now, somebody had told me, or I've heard this more than once, that his style is kind of herky-jerky when he's soloing and stuff. It's not fluid. They will complain. I mean, he definitely has his detractors. I could see them. I could understand what they're saying, but it never bothered me. I liked what he did. It's funny. I went back and listened to the Rover off of, I was going to say off of Kashmir, off of Physical Graffiti. And if you listen closely to that, you can kind of hear that trademark Jimmy Page slop, even though it's, that's a masterful song. That's another one when I was, I'll admit it, I was in some friend's basement and we're sitting around bonging out and listening to Physical Graffiti and just being completely blown away by a song like that, or Wonton Song, or that other one, the sort of country western one where they have a break in the middle and playing. It's like, do you still do the twist? Did you find that it suits you that well? Okay, that song, all without mentioning even Kashmir, or just, I don't know. I was blown away by a whole slew of Page, including the Heartbreaker and Livin' Lovin' Woman, Livin' Lovin' Maid, whatever that was called. The Heartbreaker solo was another thing that inspired me to pick up the guitar. And people are like, well, he's evil because he was into Aleister Crowley. And I would say, well, maybe he did get into contact with some stuff that might have been a little bit unpleasant. In the invisible realms. Maybe he did. I don't know. I've heard people say, oh, I can't, I just can't look at that guy. He's evil. But I never really saw it that way. He did kind of put on a front, like in Song Remains the Same, with the red eyes and then the climbing up the mountain to see the hermit and all this. He kind of took that and ran with it, that image. But I think, there's another interview where he says, it's like in 1968 or 69 when Led Zeppelin is just starting out, where he kind of says, people just don't understand us. They don't get it, what we're about in this. And I think that was more it. Aleister Crowley gets a bad reputation. He's everybody's whipping boy. He would probably be laughing if he were to look down from wherever he's at and look up, whatever. If he were like an entity out there in the invisible realms and could see in to us, he would probably get a real kick about how people say he's so evil. I don't necessarily buy it. There's a lot of hyperbole regarding what he did, and a lot of it was unseemly, I will admit. But, I think Thelema people who follow that, and these little groups of, they don't have any funding or whatever. They're just on their own out there. I think Thelema people are probably the least of this world's worries, and Thelemites, I don't know. Page was one of them. So I don't know if that ties in really to what he was doing on the guitar, but I think a discussion of Jimmy Page, I would be remiss if I didn't bring all that up. Although I said I wasn't going to talk about personalities. But with Page, it's so tied in with his music that I don't know if you can talk about Page without bringing up all that other stuff. But, you know, just speaking from a purely guitar player and a compositional and a songwriting standpoint, the thing with Page is that, and I would think everybody should try to get this if you're starting out on rock guitar, is the dynamics, the soft to the loud, right? Getting those dynamics in your compositions. Because I certainly could have done more with that, looking back at everything I've done. And you might as well just do that from the get-go. You want to entertain those highs and those lows, the louds and the softs. And Page was a master of the dynamics. Also, as mentioned, there was a video on YouTube that I tend to agree with. A lot of times in rock music, you have the bass player and the kick drum of the drummer that are really tight together. But Page was actually really tight with Bonham's kick drum. So that's an example of a guitar player and a drummer really being locked in, which is kind of unique. Might be very unique. Another thing about Zeppelin, right off the top of my head, is I almost considered them to be a better version of the Grateful Dead. Like, they wouldn't play stuff the same way every performance, and they were even better at it, better at improvisation. And I've heard people complain, or read of them complaining in comment sections, you know, that Page will take 2 songs and then turn it into 3 songs, and it's kind of exasperating for some people, but I always like that open-endedness, or at least the perceived open-endedness of Led Zeppelin, that you just never knew quite what you were going to get in a performance. I think Page, you know, he suffered a lot because of his, I guess he was shooting up a lot of heroin around 1977 through 79, 81. I guess the band broke up in 1980 because of Bonham's death. Was that is that the year? Page was suffering because of his heroin usage. So I almost think that peak Led Zeppelin was in 1973, but I do enjoy, like, Nebworth 77. Is it 70? No, 79. Nebworth 79, when they do Akila's Last Stand and Kashmir, that's sort of the newer material. I think that's more of a challenge. And Song Remains the Same, it's more of a challenge to play live than what they started out with. But he definitely had, you know, he had, sleeping sickness, and then there was one tour where he was playing with a broken finger. So he just had all these problems right along, and he did really well with them. And so much of his material informed what I became. You know, you might not even agree with it, you know. When you hear me, you don't hear any resemblance to Page or whatever, but this is one guitar player that just utterly blew my mind, so to speak. And like I said, he's, to this day, I think he's still my favorite guitar player. There's nothing like some Led Zeppelin.